Welcome. We are here tonight to talk about a topic that is very much on people's minds, and that is firescaping. How do we reduce the vulnerability? Now, before we get started, I wanted to share a little bit about this puzzle. So the puzzle is how we actually navigate all of our classes. So if you've been with us before, you will recognize the puzzle. And it serves as a reminder that everything exists in a greater context. So, oftentimes when we're thinking about landscape, we think about plants or we think about irrigation. But it's really, really important to understand the bigger picture. So for tonight's topic, we've got 6 pieces of the puzzle. We're going to start out with this watershed-wise approach. What is it and why does it matter? Number 2, we'll talk a little bit about the ecology around fire. Number 3, changing the balance, which is how have things shifted from what was a relatively natural process to something that has really become out of balance. Number 4, how do we protect our structures? Number 5, when it comes to the landscape, what are some design choices that you can make? And then number 6 is all about maintenance. And again, what are choices that you can make that you can make that will help reduce the vulnerability of your property. So we're going to start out with the first puzzle piece, which is the watershed-wise approach to landscaping. So a watershed is defined as an area of land where all of the water that flows under it or over it goes to the same place. So if you imagine that you've got mountains and then you've got precipitation that falls on those mountains and it makes its way down into the valley where you've got some sort of body of water, a creek, a stream, a river. And that area where it falls into that particular body of water is considered, let's say, that river's watershed. So as I look at this image, this is a balanced watershed, a natural system. You've got your precipitation makes its way down. It is intercepted by the plants, by the canopy, by the trunk, by the leaves, etc. And as it hits the ground, some of that water is going to flow overland into our body of water. In this case, we are talking a river. Some of that water will also make its way into the soil. And from there, that water is cleaned and filtered by the roots of the plants and by the biology that exists in the soil. And then we've got a couple of options. That water is either going to move basically sideways, making its way to the river, or it will actually continue to infiltrate. And that is how we actually replenish our aquifers. And then the sun comes out, that water evaporates or evapotranspires, goes back up into the sky, and we start that process all over again. So this is a natural balanced watershed. And what we want to think about is with this natural system, we imagine that our homes are basically mini watersheds. So you can imagine that the roof is like the top of the watershed. The street is the bottom of the watershed, and then everything in between is within our ability to improve. And as we go into the rest of this presentation, we don't want to look at firescaping as something separate, something other, but more how do the principles of watershed-wise design, how can they be applied in order to help reduce that vulnerability? So really, it's a way of general designing principles rather than something unique or separate. And so again, there are key things that are important with building soil, with holding on to rainwater, with using climate-appropriate plants that still need to be integrated in the landscape, even as we plan for firescaping design. So we start out with the first one, very important. It doesn't matter what you're planting or where you are, the importance of building that healthy soil sponge. So the idea that when we get rain, either rain or even irrigation, that the soil has the ability to hold on to that water, release it to the plants, and that we have lots and lots of biology in there creating nutrients for our plants. Super important, especially in these areas that are more vulnerable to fires. There is the need to hold on to our rainwater, to not lose it and have it run out to the ocean. And then, of course, planting. So planting with climate appropriate plants. If there is an opportunity to plant with natives, that is an additional bonus. With native plants is this symbiotic relationship with the wildlife. So your birds, your insects, what have you, have a direct correlation with our native plants as well. And then the importance of getting water into the green water zone. So that is the area where the roots are. So when we think about the green water zone, it's easy to go, oh, that means the water that is going down into the aquifers. And that's not it. It's actually essential that we get the water to where the roots are so that our plants can actually take advantage of it. All right, so before we go on to the second piece of the puzzle, just a reminder to ask your questions. So given what we have been experiencing, where the fires have gotten so huge and impactful, we forget that fire actually has its place in the natural systems. And once upon a time, before we made choices that we have made as we've grown and developed, our fires were much more moderate. And when we think of how our native plants are actually adapted to fires, the role that fires play in their germination, it's essential that fire be there in order to have these plants propagate. So examples are, we love our ceanothus, we put it into our landscapes, but those, as well as other chaparral plants, are required in order to spread those seeds. Other ones are sequoias. So yes, generally speaking, if the fires are not too intense, they are resistant to the fire. However, what they need is they need that cleared surface, that bare soil, in order for their seeds to germinate. And then finally, there's at least one variety of pine, the bishop pine, that needs the fire in order for those seed cones to open. So if we didn't have the fires, these plants in their natural environments would not be able to germinate. So as we were talking about with the sequoias, that forest floor needs to be cleared of other plants in order for the new growth to be able to take root, get sunlight, and grow. And we don't often think about this one, but in parts of California, we have grasslands. And there's something called succession, which means that over time, the soil changes as well as the type of plants that are growing. So grasslands eventually will evolve into small shrubs, into larger shrubs, and eventually into trees. And so in order for the grasslands to stay grasslands, the fires actually play a very important part in making sure that that succession stays consistent. Now, certainly where you've got overgrowth, it's a great way, again, to clear out some of our invasives, as well as creating opportunities for our natives to reestablish themselves. And then in the moderate fires, that burnt material, as it breaks down, actually will provide nutrients for the biology, which can then provide nutrients for the plants. And if we didn't have the challenge is when we go from moderate to these infernos is that everything is destroyed. In some places, the soil actually becomes almost like glass, becomes hydrophobic. And so the moderate fires, again, had their role in making sure that that system stays balanced. And when it's not able to do that, then it is much harder for us to recuperate, for our plants, our animals to recuperate after these devastating fires. So let's take a look at what's happened when we started changing the balance. So we saw the role that fire has in an ecosystem when things were in balance, and then how we have come along and started messing with things. In our fear of having our fires, and rightfully so, but the challenge is that we attempted to completely stop the fires, which means that all of a sudden you have a lot more fuel. So this is what came up after the rainy season that we had a couple of years ago. So, lots and lots of grasses and small shrubs that were growing up. And all of a sudden, when there was a fire, there was so much more that was able to burn. So yeah, lots and lots of fuel that not only burns the grasses, but then makes its way up into the taller plants, getting into our trees, and then those embers are flying out and making their way into more urban settings. One of the other things that we've been doing, and understandably, the wildlands are beautiful. We want to be close to it, but the challenge is that we have now brought them so close together that it is too easy from a fire to start in the wildlands and then to make their way into more urban settings. And certainly as the fires have gotten stronger, we've just experienced that here in the LA area. With the winds, those embers are able to fly further. So the risk becomes ever more significant. And then, of course, it is exacerbated by the drought. So that was the big thing we were experiencing here in LA, was we had not had any rain and we had all of this fuel. And then, of course, we had the winds. So it's fine. It's fine to have the plant material, but when you have a lot of plant material and that plant material is dried out, then it definitely does just go up. Adding to that, so you've got drought, which makes our plants vulnerable, which means now that when there's an infestation of beetles or other pests, their ability to bore into these plants, our plants are less resilient because of the water stress. And then you get the beetles, which then kill the trees. So we now have all of this literal kindling that is available for the moment that a spark is lit. And in many cases, we've got these invasive species that have gotten into our mountains, our riparian areas, and they are also, because they're not being managed by these more moderate fires, add to the spreading of that fire. So what we have to do is look at how can we do things a little bit different? And there's both the macro, the urban planning, the big picture, the master plans, and then there are the much more, the smaller, the micro, what are things that we can do on our own properties. But one of the things we definitely have to look at is how are we developing our areas. Literally Altadena has been wiped out, the Palisades have been wiped out, Paradise was wiped out. And as we come back to rebuild, what can we do differently to make us less vulnerable? So the example on the left, as beautiful it is, to be surrounded by the forests, it means that when a fire starts, that community is completely enclosed. Compared to the image on the right, there's still access to the wildland, but many, many more opportunities to exit if that is necessary, and that entire community is not fully enclosed. Other things that we can think about, the idea that we go back again and again to nature and how she designs, if you will. And one of the things that we have found a lot of resources, thoughts, philosophies, is when we look at regenerative land management. And so we talk about the watershed-wise approach to landscaping, and then this is that, and some additional thoughts. So one of the things here especially is the role that animals can play. So, you know, how are the animals managing the fuel? I know there are places where they bring the goats out, right, in order to chomp down on that fuel. Other things, how important it is that that soil be hydrated, that the plants be hydrated, so that when a fire does come, we don't have this dry kindling. And then, of course, the idea that we have controlled burns so that we can get that fuel under control, so that it's not so easy for a fire to start and then to just explode the way they have done more and more. And then, of course, as we move into the smaller, more intimate solutions, what can be done when it comes to the actual landscape design of your own property. So we'll definitely be talking about that in a little bit more time. But we look at this image here, and you can see all around all that has been burned, and yet, you know, right there in the middle is a site that has basically escaped the fires. So what can we learn from something like this? So we're going to start out with protecting the structures, because even though there are many things that we can do in the landscape, it's really, really important to understand what do we need to do to our homes and our structures to make them less vulnerable to the fires. Because 60 to 90% of the homes that were burned due to the embers. So that was these embers making their way up into the skies, obviously exacerbated by the winds, and then the way that those embers made their way into the house. So we're going to look at some things that, you know, you definitely want to consider if you are certainly in the wild and urban interface, and even, you know, even generally. I mean, I live in Santa Monica and I live in an urban setting, but man, those embers could just as easily have traveled a little bit further if the wind was blowing in my direction. So it's gotten to the point where it doesn't really matter where you live. It is definitely worth taking a look at. So the way that we look at a property and a structure is, what are the defensible zones that we need to think about? And typically it's going to go out, you know, 0 to 5 feet is the closest to the home. It has certain requirements. We move out a little bit further. We go out to 30 feet. The requirements change. They're a little bit looser. We move out to 100 feet and the same thing. So what needs to be done in each of those zones in order to increase the ability to protect our properties? So I don't think I can do the video here. One of the links that we're going to send you, this is an incredible video. The experiment was done by an insurance company, and they basically simulated what it looks like when you've got embers that are blowing on a home. And it gives you the opportunity to really see where your home is vulnerable. So it's only like 4 minutes long, but it's so informative, where you get almost like these small little vortexes where the embers get trapped, and then eventually they make their way into the home, where it is much, much easier for your home to catch on fire. So definitely check this out. So most people who live in that interface, who are actually out in the wildlands, May or June, you're being told that you need to reduce the fuel. So we've seen how important it is that grasses, shrubs get cut back, and that is stricter the closer you are to the home. We used to have an image here of that being done by the goats. So yeah, you know, you know, are you doing that? Are you having, you're hiring someone to do that? But how important it is that you cut away, especially if you've got a lot of dead material there. And then other things to think about is how the fire moves basically through space. So we're going to come back to the embers in just a moment, but are there opportunities to actually interrupt that path? So I'll show you some other examples, both in the landscaping as well as your home. So, you know, assuming the fire stays relatively low, it's going to hit this stone wall. Plus, these plants are pretty hydrated. So that also helps protect the site. Now that one was a stacked stone. You can create the same thing with gabion walls. Gabion walls are a combination of some sort of, not a chain link, but a mesh, or it could be chain link, but basically some sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? So you've got stone and you've got the metal that helps keep that in place. And the words escape me, but we'll come back to that afterwards. And then really, really important is making sure that if there's a fire going on, that the fires can actually access your property. We had one example where someone had a fence that went around the entire property, and there was actually no way to open or access that fence from the hillside. The only way in was through the house itself. And so basically they created a barrier for the firefighters to be able to reach their homes from a different direction. Or if the fire is making its way towards the front door and you need to access via the back door, all of a sudden there is no easy way out. So just thinking about it as you're looking at your property, if I needed to make a dash for it, how can I get out? Now, looking at the different parts of a home and where you are vulnerable, the obvious one is it starts with the roof. So even though these shake roofs are beautiful and they blend into their environment, they are also very, very vulnerable to fires. So this is a shake roof, and they're much better, and the technology keeps improving, that there are roofs that are much better choices. So that includes things like concrete and clay tiles. It includes fiberglass asphalt, and of course, metal roofs, so that if the embers come here, not to say that they are completely resistant, but that they are much less likely to combust. So this is another one, is when you look up at your eaves. The possibility, imagine all those little embers that are, you know, blowing through the sky. They make their way up into and under your roof. So if your eaves are open, there's all kinds of places for those embers basically to nest, to take hold. And then once they are, you know, in touch with the wood, it just makes it really, really easy for that fire to start to spread. If it is closed instead, sealed off, then it's going to hit those embers, basically bounce off, and then you help prevent that opportunity of those embers getting stuck and starting something. The same thing happens in the gutters. So the thing that is tricky with gutters is that you get all kinds of leaf litter that will build up. And so what we don't want to do is anything that is potentially flammable or easily flammable, being so close to the house. So you can put these gutter guards on it. It's really, really easy if you need to blow them or you have someone come out and do that for you. But again, you don't have this buildup. So it's the kind of thing when when you were out camping and you wanted to start a fire, you'd put together all the little twigs and all the little leaves and then poof, off it would go. The exact same thing is happening at your gutters. All of these little entry opportunities. So who would think that you would have to worry about your vents? So you've got them, and what you want to do again is make sure that they are covered. You absolutely need those vents, but you want to make sure that they are covered with screens where the mesh is fine enough that the embers can't get in. And then similar to what was happening with the roof is that you've got your siding. So the one on the left is probably a vinyl. It's literally melted off of this home. The one on the right, again, this wood shake. It's so cool and it's so homey, and yet it is also so vulnerable to fire. Lots of options. Again, that will be a safer choice. So obviously stone or brick, stucco is also a better option. And then you've got these fiber cement siding. And again, you want to make sure that it goes all the way down to the ground, that there's no wood that is exposed below it. So basically that your entire home, from base to top, has no opportunity for those embers to make their way into the home where it will catch much more quickly. And then this makes complete sense. You've done all of this work with the right kind of roof, the right kind of siding, and then you've got a wooden fence, wooden steps that actually touch the home. And it just takes a little bit for that wood to catch, and then the fire spreads, and then all of a sudden it is literally at your front door. So change it out for something different. And I'll show you some examples in the next section. And then this one seems like a no-brainer. It was kind of amazing that we found these images, but basically people were storing their firewood either right under their homes or right next to their homes. And yeah, it doesn't take much imagination to see what would happen once a fire gets started there. So let's go ahead and look at some of the things that you can do. We've talked about the home, how can you be more proactive as far as your home, your structures. And now we'll go ahead and take a closer look to what you can do on the outdoors in order to slow or defend your home from a potential fire. So it's important to understand that there's two different terms when it comes to your home. So the first one is, what can we do to make our homes defensible? So that means making sure that your firefighters can access your site and that they will be able to defend it. The other one, and we saw that, we've seen that, is what is survivable. So if the firefighters can't get to your home, can't access it, what will actually survive after everything is done? So we're going to start by looking at what stokes the fire. So the first one, and we've talked about this a little bit in the beginning, is fuel. So you need some key things when it comes to a fire in order for it to spread. So obviously you need something that burns, which is why it's so important as you're looking at your property to make sure that there is no dead wood that can easily catch and spread. We saw what happened when the wind got involved, and how within hours what had been a small fire exploded into an inferno. So the role that plays. The other one to think about is topography and the way that that combination of wind and how fire moves in the mountains and in the hills, and how the wind catches those fires and then basically moves them up the mountains. So we talked about the different zones, and we're going to go into more detail as to what you actually want to have in each of those zones. And given that we are teaching tonight for the entire state of California, different counties may have slightly different requirements, restrictions, guidelines for properties within their jurisdiction. So other things we're looking at, we just saw the importance of your topography. So if there is a slope, it's important to understand how steep that slope is, because fire moves differently depending on the steepness of that slope. And in the guidebook that you're going to get tomorrow, we actually show you how you can measure that. So you can go out there with a line level and a string and go, wow, it's 1 to 3 slope, or 1 to 5 slope, or 1 to 20 feet slope. And depending on how steep that is, that will actually impact how you lay out your plants. So you can see, basically, generally speaking, that a mild slope or no slope allows you to plant more closely than a steeper slope. So if we look at our second item, you can see that the difference from our first level, where it was 2 times that slope, we were able to go 10 feet apart. However, when that slope changed to 20 to 40%, we were now going 20 feet apart. And then that last one, a very significant slope, greater than 40%, we were now planting 30 feet apart. And again, that is because of the way that fires move on a hillside. So take a look again at your homes and go, where my slopes are, where my hillsides are my plants, separate enough in order to be able to slow down the potential movement of that fire? And then this is one to look at, which is fire typically doesn't move along the ground, or if it does, it's not as significant as it moving into our larger plants. So one of the ways that we can prevent that is by making sure that there is space between the different heights. So the image on the left, there's basically, you can just step up from our shrub at the bottom to our tree at the top. And then it's really easy, once the fire is in the trees, for it to jump, make its way over to your home. When I look at the image on the right, they've actually pruned up the canopy. They've shortened the height on those smaller shrubs, so that, not to say with the winds that we were getting, the fires that were burning, this would have prevented it. But in cases where it could have gone either way, this might have made the difference. So we're going to start out with the zone that is closest to the house. So that's basically from 0 to 5 feet. And there are some counties that are saying there is no planting there at all. Others are, there's some planting, but it needs to be short, needs to be well irrigated. So you may need to refer to your particular area in order to see what you need to be able to provide. But even looking at this image where there is planting, these plants are well watered. They are relatively low. They're very low. And so, if the fire was to make its way into this zone, there really wouldn't be very much for it to spread with. The idea of, we say, lifting the skirts for the trees, making sure that, again, that we are watching those fire ladders. If it's not an issue, then depending on the height of the tree, we're pruning at a minimum 6 feet off the ground. And then again, if it's a taller tree, we are pruning up 1/3 of that total height, and making sure if there's any dead wood in there, especially within like the 0 to 30, I would say, then that all gets cleaned up. Other things that you want to do is look at the pathways that you are creating. So especially close to the house, we want to put down non-combustible, but also permeable. And we can have both. So you're using gravel, you're using decomposed granite, you're using permeable pavers, you're using flagstone. So it doesn't burn, but it is still letting that water into the soil. And then instead of those wooden fences, those wooden steps, we are now using something that doesn't burn. So we're looking at stone, or again, gravel, decomposed granite, lots and lots of beautiful options that are available to you. And the judicious use of rock. So we use judicious because there are too many homes out there where they have taken out the plants in an effort to conserve water, and they have put down gravel, or they have put down decomposed granite. And so as much as it is a non-combustible material, we don't want to get carried away, because when there's that much gravel, especially under the plants, it actually affects the health of your soil, which means it ultimately affects the health of your plants, which makes them less resilient to the landscape. So we've got to get water in the soil, we got to get water in the plants, and this is one of the ways that we do it. So yes, some gravel, yes, some cobbles, but use it judiciously. Now, here's some great suggestions for where you've got flagstone. There is no reason why these landscapes cannot be beautiful and welcoming. So this is an idea that you can put down herbs. You can put down thyme, you can put down oregano, you can put down diamondia. So you've got your significant hardscape, and then you've also got a little bit of softness, a little bit of color in between. And then we talk about how important it is that we are keeping our soils hydrated, that we are keeping our plants hydrated. So is there an opportunity to capture the rain, to keep it on the property? If you are on a hillside, this may require working with a landscape professional in order to be able to, capture water on a steeper slope. But in those flat areas, certainly improving the health of your soil, small contours, you don't have to go crazy with creating, dry creek beds, but simply improving the texture of the soil, small divots, even where that water is going to hit the soil and it can't just run off. It actually has the opportunity to soak into the soil. And then capturing rain. In this case, we are moving it into a cistern. It can be, depending on what happens to the water supply, it can be there as a backup. Now, this is a small one. It isn't going to go very far, but it's got a pump, and that pump is actually powered by solar. So, if the electricity goes out, you have access to water, the potential. You can try spraying down your house or around the perimeter. It is an option. And then in those areas, maybe the 5 to 30 or the 5 to 15, instead of, I don't know if I would use the word settling for a monoculture of turf, the possibility of taking your existing turf and converting it into a natural lawn. So pretty much your turf stays. It is irrigated, though you can do that much less frequently. And we have overseeded it. So we've overseeded it with clover, potentially with wildflowers, with Bellis daisies, with small yarrows. And so what we've done is we have created a much more diverse ecosystem, which means that the plants will be more resilient, your soil becomes becomes healthier more quickly, and because it stays low, it still falls within that safe planting area closer to the house. Other low water use options, again, this is as we move away from the 5 feet. Succulents are a great option. They are full of water. It takes a lot of them, though, so the possibility that you would have some succulents in one area and then potentially other types of plantings. We've got our seaside daisy, which is a California native. We have a wild strawberry, so you actually have an edible. And so that we don't always have to use turf as the only option, that there's lots and lots of other things that you can work with. And then again, making sure that that your plants stay hydrated, especially like what we've had this year. We've seen it when we have a dry winter. We're not irrigating because it's winter. So we just have to make sure that, especially during the winters when plants are expecting their water, that we are able to provide that irrigation. So again, the further away you get from the house, um, things start to get a little less restrictive. It also depends on where you are on, if you're out in the mountains, in terms of how the fire is moving, right? So again, very, very mindful about no dead vegetation, making sure that any grasses that have grown up are kept cut down. Your trees are limbed up, your skirts are lifted, as they say, and that you are aware of the distance between your shrubs. So the steeper it is, the more space you need. This is a beautiful combination of that judicious use of rock, of the concrete planter, of those boulders, and of those lower plantings. This is another example. In this case, this is a sage, a ground cover. It's a great option actually under trees. It can tolerate quite a bit of shade as well, but it stays relatively low. It's a native, so there are multiple benefits to your plant choices. Pollinator attractor. Another one, again, you've got mostly grasses, low growing plants, and then as you move further away from the house, you've got your shrubs. You've got a wooden fence, so definitely you are taking a look at how that wood potentially connects to the house. And maybe you need something that allows you to transition from the wood fence to what actually is touching the house. We've got an example here. This is our rainwater capture area. So whatever opportunities we can take advantage of to get that rainwater into the landscape. And then we talked about creating those fire breaks so that, you know, you've got something low, you've got some fire going, it makes its way, spreads along the ground, hits this stone wall and can't really travel much beyond that. We do the same thing with our paths. So this is important not only in managing how the fire can spread along the ground, but also making sure that your site is accessible for the firefighters, right? Don't make it difficult for them. Make it really easy for them to get from, you know, wherever they're coming in to getting close enough to your home. Now, where it gets a little tricky is that on a hillside, one of the things that you are concerned about is erosion. So it's a little bit like a Venn diagram in that there are multiple things that need to be accomplished as you look at your landscape design. So yes, we want low growing plants that are not volatile, but we also want plants that help manage erosion. So here are some examples. Certainly the ceanothus and the heteromeles, those are taller plants. So if you're going to use them, you want to make sure you're using them further away from the house. You don't want them right up against your back door. And actually you wouldn't want any plants, you know, as much as that that beautiful wisteria climbing along the trellis is so lovely. It is also a potential hazard. And then again, depending on how steep the slope is, what are the opportunities to hold on to rainwater, making sure that if you are creating any sort of depression or basin, that you are aware of opportunities for erosion. So making sure that that gets put in properly. And then as we move away, further away from the home, we can actually shift to drip. When we were closer to the home, spray was probably the best option. Certainly easier to water those low-growing plants. Also make sure that if needed, there's a lot of moisture that can be applied. But as we start to move further apart, if you are planting these areas, then the drip is more efficient. And now we get out to zones 30 to 100. So the restrictions again are dropping. Basically, no dead vegetation. Again, remembering all of that dead material is kindling. And then it's basic maintenance. So using common sense in terms of, are the grasses I need to cut back? Being aware of the ladders, maybe it's not as significant, but still just now that we understand how fire moves in the landscape, just paying attention. And then what are things that you might want to consider removing that definitely make you vulnerable? So they talk about how certain plants, trees are more volatile when the fires arrive. It includes things like pine, palms, eucalyptus, juniper, and cypress. So it's tough. You've got, this 50-year-old pine tree right up against a house. It's a really hard decision to make. But if it is one of those volatile plants, then perhaps it is something to consider, or at least make sure at a minimum that there's no branches that are touching the house itself. And it's not to say that there are not beautiful options to replace with. Some of them are California natives. So the coast live oak is a lovely option. Also native is the sycamore. You've also got a desert willow, western redbud, and the Pacific wax myrtle, which are all California natives. So they help with the erosion. They are potentially more fire resistant, and they are just a lovely addition to the landscape. Consider installing a redundant spray. So it may not be that you use this all the time, but it is there in case of an emergency. And it is especially in that, let's say, 0 to 10 or 15 feet that you have it installed there. We come back again to the importance of the soil sponge. And then the last piece of the puzzle is the maintenance. So we keep building the soil sponge. This is important for the fire, but it is also important for the health of your landscape. So if you want great big lush blooming plants that don't require as much water, it starts with that soil sponge. Keeping it well hydrated in the winter. And then as you are considering what you are replacing plants with, or if you're designing a new garden, making sure that you don't bring in any invasive plants. There's a site called CalIPSI where you can look them up, and it lets you know what plants are invasive and potentially in what parts of the state they are more or less invasive. And then this one is really controversial. People get concerned that mulches actually contribute to fire. Yes and no. So there's a lot of benefits to what we call green-brown mulches, living mulches. The first thing is to make sure that it stays smaller than 1.5 inches, and that you avoid mulches that are combustible. So gorilla hair mulch is it's the same thing, right? That's how you would build your little fire when you're camping. Obviously, rubber mulches are explosive. Anything that has been sprayed or treated adds to its combustibility. And then some of these walk-on barks where you've got the bigger pieces. But the role of that green-brown mulch is so important in terms of keeping the soil moist, keeping it cool. It helps conserve water as it breaks down. It feeds the soil, which again is so important for the health of our gardens. And the importance of making sure that you've got no debris that is building up on the roof, the gutters, the base of the walls. And then if you are mowing, and again, it's not just in the mountains, it can certainly be anywhere. We are vulnerable everywhere now with these fires. Make sure that the equipment that you're using doesn't require gasoline, or if it is, that you're not storing it in the garage that is part of your home, that perhaps it's in a shed much further away. There's that picture that we continue to manage the vegetation. You can do it with a weed whacker or a lawnmower, or this is a really fun, interesting way to have that done. And then if there is a fire, and some of you may have experienced that, and that you look out and it's like, oh my gosh, I can see the flames from where I am. And so you really need to be paying attention. This is the opportunity where you turn on that redundant irrigation. You try to wet as much as possible. If the gas is on, make sure that it is turned off, both for indoor and outdoor. And this one you may not think about, but that is to leave the gates open for the firefighters. Sometimes we get so concerned about protecting our homes that we lock everything up. But the consequences of that can be very, very significant if the firefighters are not able to get to potentially where the fire is making its way towards your home. So leave it unlocked, leave it open. So that brings us to the end of this part of the conversation. We're going to have some time. There were questions that definitely came in. Pamela may have some additional things to add, to highlight, to help us remember. But before we get to that, just quickly about the rebates that are available for California American Water customers. If you are in the LA Ventura area, you're looking at SoCal Water Smart. San Diego is $1.50 a square foot, up to $750 for residential, $2,500 for commercial. And then in the Sacramento, Meadowbrook, and Hillview, also the $2 a square foot. Sonoma, $1 a square foot. And then in some of the areas, we also have rebates on smart controllers and other devices. That's if you are in the LA Ventura area. Again, you're going to that SoCal Water Smart site.
There were really some great questions, a lot around mulch, and we can kind of come back to that. But there were a few things that I wanted to add, and that is, I cannot emphasize enough the information that Marianne presented about the connectivity of fencing to the house or decks that are attached to the house and are wood. This is something where, looking at it with a contractor and considering having a section, at the very least, having a section that is metal that keeps these wooden structures from connecting up with each other, especially if you're on a hillside, especially if there are trees around. Building your deck, when you do build it, out of steel instead of out of wood. It's and making sure that if you have a deck, you are the decking material doesn't have any gaps between the decking. So it's tongue and groove on a deck. This is a very, important thing. And also that there is a cover to the gap between the top of the deck and the ground level, that is covered so that embers cannot get up underneath the deck and trapped in there, and that you don't store anything there. You don't store your extra propane for your grill. You don't store your outdoor furniture. So one of the things that we didn't really talk about in this class, but is also important, is that when you have outdoor furniture, it's really important if you are on, if you get a warning that, so this is before evacuation, if you get the chance, right? I mean, if you're given that much time, get your furniture away from the house. So like significantly away from the house, all the cushions, get them inside. Doesn't matter how dirty they are at the time, just take them inside, get the furniture away, because that vinyl furniture burns in a second. And the cushions and stuff, they all burn. This is really something to think about. The other thing I really want people to think about is when you have roofing done or you have stucco done, the screed that is supposed to be at the bottom of a stucco installation, or the screed that is on the edge of a roof as it comes down to where your gutters may be. And if you don't have gutters, then to the fascia of the roof. That metal screed is a really important filler for gaps between, the different parts of the structure. A lot of contractors will skimp on this, and they will not, make sure that that is done right. It kind of looks ugly, sometimes designers will, try to get around doing that. It's not modern looking, but guess what? It makes a big difference with the embers. And I see the question here about where do I find the mesh for the attic meshing? And then it's also good for foundation meshing. Almost all of your hardware stores will carry metal 1/4 inch or smaller mesh, and that's what you're looking for. So metal mesh, make sure it's not coated with plastic. It's the metal mesh that you're looking for. And almost every hardware store around, big box stores and regular, your corner hardware stores, will have that type of material. You can also probably order some online, to specifications if you need to. Yes. So the question about the stucco being finished properly, I told everybody to remind me, to talk about that, because it's a really big deal in the most recent fires. Well, first of all, things were burning so hot that, stone melted. So when the fire has gotten like that, it's very hard to talk about. It's kind of the luck of the draw. I mean, honestly, because when it's really, really hot like that, everything is melting, everything is burning. But definitely on the exterior of your building, if you have an opportunity to do material that is either metal, or where the coating is a fire rated coating on it. It's like metal siding that has a fire rated coating on it. If you do stucco, you're making sure that all the screeds and things are correct, and that, at the base of your home, there's usually there's like a wood, if it's wood construction, there's like a wood plate. The stucco screed is supposed to come down over that plate, so it doesn't expose that wood. I mean, that's that right there, because embers will gather at the base of your home, get that wood on fire. Also around your doors is the other thing. Bring in the doormat, right? The doormat that is outside your door is going to burn, and it brings the fire into your door jamb, and your curtains on the inside, the door gets so hot. It may be fire rated, so it's keeping the fire out, but it gets so hot that the curtains and the soft furnishings that are on the inside, the carpet that comes up to the edge, that catches fire because the doors and windows are so hot. Double paned windows. So one of the major things that made the difference in the most recent SoCal fires were people who had double paned windows and double paned doors. This is an upgrade that really you need to think about. And when they're installed, make sure all those metal screeds around the windows and doors are done properly. And if you have stucco or siding, that is all interfacing properly. There are no gaps. But definitely the double pane windows, because when they're fire rated and they're going to keep things cooler for a longer period of time. If you're in a fire situation, pulling the soft materials that are against your windows and doors away from the windows and doors, the curtains, all that stuff. Now, I know that in a lot of these neighborhoods, people were concerned about things like, oh, well, there might be looting and people might, but that, stop thinking about that. This is what the National Guard's about. This is what our police force is about. Your concern is to not have your home burned up. So pull those curtains off if you can, away from the windows and doors, pull the furniture away from the windows and doors. So if it gets really hot, if a window blows out or whatever, there isn't something right there to catch and bring that fire into your house. I mentioned about the pool pump. This is something that, I've been designing and building homes and building landscapes for over 20 years and have built many, many, many pools, and people spend, a lot of money to build a pool, and then they won't pay the extra few $100s to have a portable generator pool pump installed. I am telling you, if you live in a fire zone, get a portable generator because and leave it out, because the firefighters can come, they can hook up to the portable generator and pump water out of your pool to put it on your home, to put it on your neighbor's home. We saw a lot of that in SoCal, that was the last line of defense in some of these canyon areas, and it made a big, big, big difference. Let's see. There was something else. Yes. Marianne mentioned about fencing. So there are a couple things to really think about when you have fencing installed. First of all, if you're in a fire area, I would not install wood fencing. Just not even wood posts, metal posts. And for fencing, you're looking for cementitious, and I can actually write this word right here into the chat. Cementitious. Whoop. Well, pretty close. It'll get you to search cementitious material for fencing. So there's actually a brand it's a national brand, and it's kind of, I usually don't talk about brands, but it's so ubiquitous, and it's kind of almost like a word. It's like a word like Xerox, right? It's this material called Hardy Backer. It's used in siding. It's also an excellent material to make fencing out of. And it's fire rated, and so it won't burn as quickly. If it does burn, it's made out of cement board, and it's a good material to make your fences out of. And when you do make your fences, a gate on both sides. Now I know you don't want to talk to your neighbors, right? I get it. Living in some communities, it's just like I don't want to deal with them. But having a gate that everybody has a key to on both sides of your property can be the difference between life and death. First of all, firefighters can get into your backyard or into an area through that gate. You can get out through that gate, and your neighbors can get out through that gate. And when fire is, especially in hillside areas and wildland interface areas, when fire is bearing down, you need to have the ability to get out quickly. So having those fences that are wide enough, so they're at least 4-foot gates, fencing. Gates. At least a 4-foot gate that you can open up, that people can get through, and that aren't covered with plant material and so forth. And there's no plant material around them. In terms of life and death, and also access to your property, those are really important. Trying to think of anything else, because a lot of information is new. Like, we're sharing information. I mentioned in the chat or in the Q&A that there were homes in the most recent SoCal fires where eucalyptus trees were very, very close, or on the properties and all around the properties, and they were standing unburned or just singed, and the homes were melted. So what's that about? It's not about one plant or another. It's about the environment that those plants are in making sure that soil is healthy and nice, you're holding on to water, and also that those trees are limbed up. So limbing up a tree 20, 30 feet off the ground, if it's a 100-foot plus tree, that is what makes sense because there's nothing there for the embers to catch and burn. I know. So someone said, are California peppers fire resistant? They are not. Now, we did have a picture that had a California pepper in it. They are, no, in the kind of fires we've been seeing, it's very, very few things are fire resistant. The challenge with the California pepper is that the shape of it brings that plant material down. If, in order to have it be in its right shape, the plant material comes all the way down to the ground. And so, and very, very fine leaves. So, once you start pruning it to be accommodating for the fire concerns, it starts losing its appeal just for the kind of plant. And if you've got a lot of property, you're maybe not in a fire zone, or there's a 30, 40-foot gap between you and the edge of the tree. Because remember, the tree itself is a 40-foot tree, wide tree. If you have 40 feet between you and the edge of that canopy, okay, then, trim it up, not in the ground. It's a good thing. But if that's 10 feet away from your house, it needs, think about replacing it. I always say this is the most difficult class for me as a Q&A person, because a lot of what I talk about is plant removal and, challenges that we're facing. And it is, it is a big challenge. It's very sad to lose trees on a property, and not think that you have to remove them, and you might have to. And one final thing I did want to mention is about the fire breaks that Marianne talked about with the gabion walls, which are the metal boxes filled with stone, or sometimes filled with broken concrete, or even walls that are made out of stone. That putting that kind of thing on your property, especially if you have some hillside and you're in a fire zone, is a really, really, really good idea, because they create fire breaks. So, fire coming up a hill is going to be stopped by that stone structure. And anytime you can slow it down, it's a really, important thing to do. So having that, and even having plant material that's dense, green, not a lot of debris in it, irrigated, that can also be a fire break. So these are things to think about. There's a lot to think about. We will continue to update this workshop and continue to provide you with information about fire escaping, and also about how to recover from the fires. So I want to thank everybody. Marianne and Indy, anything else we want to talk about before we sign off?
Um, I did have a question. There was a lot of suggestions from you as far as pruning your tree, or if you needed to take out your tree, to contact a certified arborist. Do you
Yes.
have a website that you can maybe include in the links for the
Yes, thank
arborist?
you. Thank you. So I think it's isa.org, International Society of Arborists. And so if you use your search engine and put in certified arborist, licensed arborist, that will get you in the right place, and it will probably take you to the ISA website. At the very least, you want a contractor that has an ISA certification to remove things and to give you advice. A healthy tree is a great defense. The challenge is a lot of our trees are, they're under stress and they're not that healthy. They have things going on that, you haven't really identified because you haven't been paying. Hey, it's hard to pay attention to some of this stuff, but pay attention to your trees from that perspective, because a healthy tree is going to be much more fire resistant than something that has damage from bark beetle or some other thing. So, or a stress tree. So, having that arborist even look at it and tell you, you know what, this is pretty good. And if you were to take branches, this is where you take it. So also so that it's balanced and it's not like unstable, because right, you don't want that even in not the fire situation. That's not good. So that's the thing to do.
All right.